from others that we think would be helpful to the industry. For example, in this, the Producers Guild information, they have something called the green light checklist. So in this document, it is a guideline for producers to determine whether they are ready to start production, or if you've been shut down for any reason because of COVID, is it safe to go back to work? Another really interesting checklist in that document is something called the red light checklist, which is if you have to shut down because of COVID, what are the things that you should follow and be aware of? So two really, really good resources we haven't seen anywhere else necessarily. And then also within this document that we found particularly interesting is they talk about budget considerations for budgeting for the safety protocols. And then additionally, information about locations and specifically around ventilation. So again, if you have some time and want to do some reading, you can find all this stuff on our website, again, which is washingtonfilmworks.org. So before moving into today's discussion, I do want to take a minute to again thank the board of Washington Filmworks, who continues to support the work that we do. And I just need to give a big shout out to the staff at Washington Filmworks, Julie, Amber, Kendra, and our newest team member, Michaela, for their tireless and unrelenting efforts to get everyone back to work safely. So with that, let's move on to today's safety on set conversation. What we know is that it's one thing to have safety protocols down on paper, but it is definitely something else to be implementing them on set in real time. Today's conversation is all about digging in and talking to commercial producers about what's working and actually what's not working on film sets right now. It's my pleasure to introduce our guest today. When we posted about this on our social media, someone commented in the comments, I highly recommend everyone tuning in. Nikki and Buzzy are among the most experienced commercial producers in the Pacific Northwest, and we could not agree with you more. So it is my pleasure to welcome both of them. Buzzy and Nikki, will you join us?
Hi.
Welcome.
Hi. Thank you.
Thank you.
Happy to be here.
Yeah, so I would love it if you guys could just we know you so well, but can you just introduce yourselves and a little bit about your background and what you love about the film industry here?
Sure. Nikki, do you want to go first?
Go ahead. I'll let you go.
Okay. So I started producing many, many moons ago when I was about 4 in 1985. And shortly thereafter, I started getting work up in Seattle, in Washington, in car commercials. And I just absolutely fell in love with Seattle and the air up here and the people. And I moved here in 1990, but I continued to work down in LA. And a few years went by and I started to dip my toe into local work so I could stay home more often and raise my son, but at the same time keeping my foot in the LA world. So I'm kind of back and forth. And I still love living here. And my background is basically 99% commercials, which is now morphing into YouTube and web content. And yeah, everything from super, super high end $5 million budgets to $100,000. So it's all over the map, and I just love producing. So it's all a joy most of the time.
Your words, right? Most of the time, it's a total joy. Well, thank you for being here, Buzzy. I appreciate it.
Oh, thanks, Amy. Okay.
What about you, Nikki?
Same thing, similar background. I came up in the business in Dallas in mostly commercials and cut my teeth on some really big stuff. So started, like most people do, PA all the way up to line producing there, moved up here 16 or so years ago and kind of started over a little bit, did some coordinating, managing. Now I'm back to mostly line producing. But yeah, mostly cut my teeth on commercials of all size budgets and music videos, corporate stuff, etc. I also have a background in deck managing or stage managing and producing live events. So that's been really great to add to my toolkit. And I've done some really big shows, worked all over the country doing that as well. And I still do that till this day. So I have a really nice variety of skills. And I think that when you produce or production manage, you can kind of do almost any job in production as far as organizing and budgeting. So it's come in really handy. So, but yeah, it's been a couple decades so far in the business. And yeah, I mostly work up here, sometimes out of town, but most of my work is local, and it's been good. Yeah, I'm happy with my current production family up here.
Nice. I love it that you call it a family. I'll also
it is.
Buzzy and Nikki have both collaborated in meaningful ways with Washington Filmworks over the years, but most recently, Nikki helped us put some information on our website about green filmmaking. And so if that topic is of interest to you, on washingtonfilmworks.org under our resource section, you can check out that information, and she's just given us a wealth of information to share with you. So, I definitely want to dig into, the nitty gritty and, hear some of the war stories about what you guys have been experiencing on set. But I'd love to start with just some table setting and from your perspective, just at the highest level, how has productions differ from pre-COVID to COVID? How would you articulate the biggest difference in the environment now?
Go ahead, Buzzy.
Oh, you go. You go.
Okay.
We're so polite.
We're so polite. We are. So I was just going to say that. Yeah, I'd say more time prepping before. I think the amount of conversation and communication that's amped up quite a bit. I'd say just the amount of time before a job when we have to start the discussions. That's been the biggest thing, and the size. I'd say most of my jobs, it's really been. We've shrunk the crew down quite a bit. Those are the two biggest things that I've seen. Other than that, it doesn't feel that different. There's an extra level of stress, of course. I think just wearing masks, keeping your distance, being mindful of that has changed just the overall sort of energy. But in general, I feel like it's just everything just takes longer. We're on it for longer. We start earlier. Crews are smaller, not always, but in general, those are the things that I see are kind of the big changes that that I'm just now okay, this is pretty consistent what it's going to be like for the next little bit.
Got it. Buzzy,
Yeah.
What about it from your perspective?
Yeah, I totally agree with all of that. I think time is really the biggest issue for me. Everything takes so much longer. The communication is tougher when you have a client and agency in on Zoom, and everybody's trying to make decisions as quickly as possible and be mindful of the length of the day. And yeah, just starting earlier. I mean, for me, I just put in a lot of free days before a job starts because I'm trying to make sure, however I can, to keep the crew as safe as possible. And it's not as easy as it sounds. Yeah. Especially the air exchange. To me, that's number one, and that's a tough one to stay on top of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and again, I'll just mention that PGA thing because they had some interesting information in there about ventilation specifically. So I'm going to revisit with you in a little bit, ladies, about the time, because I'm hearing a ton about that from people who are working in the industry. So I want to revisit that in a little bit. But let's jump in with, in the roles that you have, you're interfacing with clients on a regular basis. So can you talk about the conversations that you've had to have with clients, or have there been difficult moments, or is there an understanding from the client side that this is the new normal for a while? Let's talk about that for a sec.
Well, I just literally had this conversation last night because the creative team weren't fully aware of the 6-foot distance for actors. And it sort of shocked me that they would be writing to just the old days and not being aware of the new information coming out. And so I had to drop the bomb, and there were a lot of unhappy little faces. But, there's no fooling around. It's a law and it's a mandate. And so it made it easier for me to say, look, this is the way it is, and we can't skirt around it. And so that was helpful that we have such a strong governor who's insisting on 6 feet. When I was in Atlanta, it was not requested. I mean, I had 3 actors on a sofa all together with their masks off. And that was interesting. But I had everybody tested in advance, including myself and the director. And they felt They agreed to do it. And we kept the masks on as long as possible. But as soon as we started their lines, they took it off, put it down. Anybody that was in the room with the actors had to wear, in addition to their mask, a face shield. So we were really on it. And by the end of the job, I asked them all if they felt safe and respected. And they all said absolutely. So that was good. And nobody got COVID, knock on wood. So
knock on wood, right?
Yeah.
So, and for those that are not aware of the safety standards in Washington State, talent can be closer than 6 feet, but one person also has to be masked at all times or have a divider between them. And from a creative standpoint, that's very difficult. We've heard a lot about that too. So just a little clarifying moment about our safety standards. Nikki, do you have anything to add about like the conversations on the client side and what that's been like for you?
It's been really varied. It's actually been an interesting evolution from when I started working early April, I think it was. I think everybody was a bit more on the same page now. And I think the people who were working client-wise, who had jobs, they were very sensitive and maybe scared of doing things too quickly, too big, but that there was still information, like we were still working on and understanding what was happening and what the situation was with the pandemic. So it's evolved, and now I'm noticing it's going from being more careful to being a little riskier. And I think what's happening is all the companies and all the clients that maybe held off for a while and now are like, okay, we got to do this. People are getting a little bit more comfortable. And then there's that separation. And Buzzy and I talked about this a little bit, I think, where if you have clients in agency, if you have an agency, on a Zoom call, there's a bit of a disconnect. And I'm finding that disconnect is not only physical, but mental. There's like that they're not in it, they don't see it, they're not on set or even close to set, they're not even in the physical space at all. So I'm finding people are taking a few more risks, and that you do have to say, this is what the state requires, this is what the state mandates, this is and there's a constant reminder, which is interesting. So what started out as, okay, I felt very taken care of in the first few jobs. And then it just kind of started to get a little bit like, okay, you're asking us to do what? So I'm not sure what's happening, but I think people are like, we got to get this, we want to shoot this before fall, or we want to shoot, we've got, we want to shoot this as much as, creatively as we can. And so pushing boundaries, and I'm not quite sure what's happening, but that's what I see, is this evolution of sort of people kind of being more careful, and then leaving it up to the freelance producer, to push back whenever they see that something's wrong, which I find to be a little ridiculous, because I there's only so much as a producer that you can do. You have to have that company also that hires you sort of behind you, saying, these are our rules, actually. So it's not just our freelance producer. We stand behind the state laws and the mandates. So that's so far, that's been my experience. It's been a variety, but it started really, really well. And I think it's kind of degrading a little bit, and I'm not quite sure how that's gonna change. So.
It's interesting too, because you guys both started by saying like it's just taking more time, and now they're like, let's go, right? So there's
100%.
Interesting dialogue that you must be having, which
some interesting, yeah.
I don't want to go too far. Like, any suggestions about how to bridge that with your clients that you worked with? Like, what has worked for you? Like, is there like, do you make them read them, the mandatory, like, any tips for people who haven't had those conversations yet about what to say?
It's a good question.
Yeah, I mean, from my end, here's the frustrating part, because people aren't quite aware of how the process works, certainly in commercials, because I've been in so many meetings where people say, well, the producer just has to insist, and the producer has to just inform the client. The producer has to make sure the agency is aware of the rules. Well, it doesn't quite work like that. Nikki and I are hired after the fact. Sometimes we bid, but I'm speaking for myself now. Mostly I get the budget, it's already done. And so I have to work with what I have. And for instance, the job I'm on now, it's underfunded. And so I have to take the little amount, it's half of what I think we need, but I had no choice. It's there. I have to take it and figure out how to, parse it out so that I can keep people safe. I mean, I found out I can get the PPE myself off Amazon cheaper than getting it anywhere else. So that's what I've been doing. And it's kind of crazy, but I want to make sure I stay on budget, and I want to make sure the crew is safe. So it's just a misconception that we have a lot of power that we don't actually have. Right, Nikki?
Yeah. I just want to go, let's just make this really clear. Like I get production, producers, production managers, because I still production manage sometimes, but I get that there's this notion that we can, we have the power to tell agency and client XYZ and relay things and then make them stick to it. And then also do that with the crew. And also, so that you're asking us to parent and monitor and police a very large group of people. And it does not work that way. And like Buzzy said, most of the time that we get our budgets, there are things that have already been determined creatively in that budget and relate to the agency and client about expectations, because that's usually a part of that bidding process. And so, by the time we get it, we're sort of like, there's already been some rules and boundaries established, which can be hard to sort of bust that up and come in and say, oh, actually here, I'm starting this job and I'm going to let you know that there's all the stuff you need to do. Just a reminder, these are all the rules. It really does need to start as early as possible when the bidding process is happening with the production company. So those standards are set. It's clear in the bid. In the bidding specs, it's clear. That's what I'd like, because that would save, because everything goes downhill. And so that's what I'm noticing, is that it doesn't really, the conversation maybe happens a little bit, but not really until the job starts and the producer starts. And that's it's too late. It's just, I think it's just too late for that conversation to be had.
It was interesting. I was talking to a producer yesterday who was budgeting for all the safety protocols, and it was a 37% increase to do everything that they wanted to do, right, in the budget. So that's pretty extraordinary. And I think, a nice segue, what you guys are talking about are a nice segue of like when you come into the job. As you guys know, having produced stuff lately, we are required to, in Washington State, to have something called a COVID-19 safety plan. Which is, what you're going to do to keep the crew safe. So within that, who's writing that right now? So if that's a requirement, do you write that? Does the agency write that? Does that, like, who writes that?
Well, again, it's evolved, but I'd say this last job I did was a good example of maybe how it should be done. So it was the initial plan.
That's a nice distinction. That's how it should be done. Maybe.
Yeah, and that's the thing, is it's so deep. It's so layered and so deep, and there's my head spins around a little bit. But so the production company, whoever hires you, has some sort of a plan, sort of this umbrella plan that is probably based off of the Safeway Forward. Let's just assume, and maybe state protocols.
Safeway Forward is the national unions came together and put together a document called the Safeway Forward. It is also on our website if you want to take a look at it.
And it's a great document. But so a lot of the companies are basing it off of that. Then what they're doing is they're handing it off to us along with the Safeway Forward. And then the state, like the last job, we had 3 documents that we had to sort of cross-check. And it was the state and Safeway Forward, and then also the production company's protocol. Then we had to take that, distill it down, and apply it to our job. So every job is different. That's the other thing, is that you can't use one document across the board for any job, really, just because you're going to have to do things that are specific to your job and how many people you have and where you are and whatever, and if it's union or not union, et cetera. So I find that it should start with the production company, but you're going to have to apply it to the specific location where you are, and the number of crew and talent and that kind of situation. So it's a many tiered process in order to get to the actual document that applies to your job that you would then distribute to your crew and your agency and your client.
Got it. Buzzy, do you have something to add there?
Yeah, I just wanted to say I've been bidding. I don't actually do the bid, but they call me to check out the bid after the fact. And almost every production company I'm dealing with in LA runs most of their rules by the AICP. That's sort of their gold standard.
Yeah.
The AICP rules, and because they're really good and they're very thorough. So I feel
I do have to say
comfortable with
this,
that.
Buzzy, that's one thing about, before I forget, the AICP, and I don't know if this has changed at all. It seems like it's changing on a regular basis, but AICP, I believe, currently for commercials, doesn't require testing. And so
That's correct.
that was a conversation. I'm glad you brought that up, because thank you. That's what the production company based their start or their safety plans on. So, but AICP, but they were following AICP, not necessarily Safeway forward. They were kind of combining, but ultimately this is the minimum, maybe a little extra, but the minimum we have to do based on what AICP says we need to do. And testing is not a part of that, which I found to be a little shocking, because I personally believe that testing is like the Safeway forward says. The first thing it says is that is the cornerstone. So personally, I feel like testing, because then you can show up on set, and if you've had your group A has all been tested, and maybe group B has been tested, then there's this sort of, you can kind of not relax, but there's a little bit of like, okay, cool. All right. We're showing up at a good foundation of health. Yeah. So yeah, just
the only problem there is when you're flying people in, and like on my job, I'm flying the talent in from Boston, and my director just arrived, and the DP just arrived the day before we're heading to set. So there's no time,
to do it.
I mean, there's time to do it, but by the time we get the results, we're shooting. So right. It's funny because I have had two different ways of thinking from production companies. They basically, one says, yes, test as much as you can, we'll pay for it. And on my job in Atlanta, the director, myself, and all three talent got tested 3 days before the job. We were all negative, and I think it helped everybody's peace of mind, not only ours, but the crew, because they're all local, and here we are flying in. And so everybody felt good about that. Now, I've also had companies tell me, we don't want to test. We feel it's going to make us liable down the line. And so I don't understand that. I prefer to get tested. And I'm going to mention this when we start shooting next week, that I would prefer crew to get tested. It's free and it's easy. And I don't know, I haven't talked to many crew people about this, but why wouldn't you? Maybe every other week, just to know,
Yeah. I'd say most people are, I'm sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
No, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, it seems like most crew folks are testing on a pretty regular basis, because right now people are going from job to job to job. So I agree, Buzzy. I think that's happening. I think people are amenable to it. It's easy, it's free. If you can do it, do it. If you're not inclined to do it, just take a moment if you don't mind. And it seems like most people are doing that, which is really great.
Good.
Yeah, so this is a big conversation that we are having at Washington Filmworks with the community, is the ability to access testing in general. So you guys are talking about commercial production, which is a shorter production schedule. Is your advice then, or the way that you've been handling it, just to send people to those public locations to get the test? Have you tried other avenues to access testing at all?
We did a combination. I feel like I know more about it now, which is great. We did a combination of county, Pearson, King drive-through testing, and then we also did some same day, and we did some 24-hour ones as well. So we had, which I think any production company should just set up accounts with these people, because there's a couple companies, Atlas, and then COVID response group. And we just called them and set it up. And you can easily go grab tests, bring them to set, do a quick swab, take it back to the lab, get your results. Of course, it all depends on the budget, but we ended up, we just constantly had a PA going and picking up tests and bringing it back, people swabbing, bring it. And then we would tell them we need it by the end of the day, or we need it by tomorrow, depending on what group that person was in, what that person was doing the next day, et cetera. So we just had those three things always going which was nice. And we just had to, it was a separate thing we had to manage. And you do have to have a PA, and even, you know, my coordinator was managing that quite a bit. So there's a lot of time spent on that, but that was a really good combo, I thought.
Buzzy, so I'm curious to know from both of you. So my understanding right now, and I just want to be very clear that I'm not speaking for the unions, and I don't, you know, in like my understanding of what's happening with the unions right now is if you have short form content, it is not required to test. For long form content, it is. Is that your understanding right now?
That's my understanding.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
that is correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
So then I'm curious to know, like, if you are doing a non-union job, are you requiring it? Is the agency or client requiring it, or is it just best practice that you're recommending? Like, where is that line falling right now? Are you as producer saying you should do this because it's the right thing to do, or are like agencies saying we should do this because it's the right thing to do?
I think speaking for me, I think it's the producer saying it's the right thing to do. I haven't seen agency or client really caring about what, you know, keeping us safe. It's a terrible thing to say, but I don't feel that. That's right, Nikki. You know, unfortunately, and especially, I mean, I flew to Atlanta, and the client and agency live in Atlanta, and they didn't come to set because they didn't feel safe. It's like, oh, it's okay for me to fly across the country. And then I had to sit on Zoom and watch them eat ice cream and have pet their dogs. And you know, they're like so comfortable at home. And we're like, oh, yeah. So worried about everybody's safety.
Well, that's such an interesting question, because one of the things I'm curious about is, given the state of the state, you guys, are you having trouble crewing up? Are people, how are crew and talent feeling about going back to work?
I haven't noticed anybody turning work down because of COVID. It doesn't seem like that's a thing. Vacations, that's what I'm having a problem now, but it's not COVID related. I think people really need to and want to work to pay the bills.
Yeah. I'd say the same. The only thing the only sort of thing that people will say is, you know, as they know the creative, and as, you know, depending on their job title, they might want specific things to happen. They may want specific kinds of testing for whatever. They may want some assurance of safety on set. I'd say that's happening more and more. People are like, okay, great, I totally want to work, but just tell me, you know, what's. I'd say most of the time, and it is a bad habit, I think, because of everyone in production, where we're like, yes, please, I'll take the work. Then you show up on set and you're like, I have these grievances, you know, but nobody's right now, like, except for a few maybe vanities people, which obviously they should, because they are right in the dead center of everything. Most people are just taking work, and maybe they're saying something later as the discussion gets deeper and deeper and more into the job. But no, people want to work for sure. For sure.
But on that note, Nikki, I just decided this week that I'm not going to take a job until I see the budget, because I said yes to the job, and then I saw the budget, and it's just woefully underbid, and it's very stressful, and it doesn't seem fair to me or the crew. And it's kind of like, I want to see it on paper before I commit.
Absolutely.
I think that's such good advice. And I'm glad to have you guys share that with the community too, because as we know, and as we're seeing, these safety protocols are expensive, right? And that's the first thing that we should all be thinking about. I do want to make a quick clarification. We did get a note from SAG-AFTRA indicating that for short form content, testing is required right now. So that was dropped in our chat. So I just wanted to mention that.
For SAG shoots,
For SAG, yep. So I wanted to move to another popular conversation that we have often, which is the COVID-19 supervisor. So in the mandatory guidelines, you must have a COVID-19 supervisor on set, and that person's job is to enforce the safety plan and monitor the health of workers. The interesting thing about this is, independent of those words, there is no guidelines from Washington State about what that means, like what kind of training this person should have, who should this person be, So I want to dig in with you ladies about, from your perspective, who should it be and who are you hiring on? Are you requiring certain levels of training for the COVID-19 supervisor?
Well, first of all the companies are not calling it supervisor.
Right.
And this is per AICP. It's called a COVID safety assistant. They're trying, I think because it's all pretty gray area right now, and the unions are a little unclear, so that they're just insisting on that as a generic term. There really isn't any certification that's across the board. So it's more like best practices. I just hired someone who has done several jobs and is aware of the rules and is completely willing and able to follow them, from temperature checks to the wristband codes to keeping people 6 foot distance. And I feel very confident in him. He's had first aid, he's had CPR. So as have I just figured I'm going to do it too, just to feel safe. You're right. And then in addition to that, most companies require a medic. And in my case, this my up and coming job, it's a medic / COVID expert. So we're well covered there.
Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah. I totally agree. I mean, I've from kind of the beginning that it makes, in my opinion, it makes sense to have someone with a medical background who can also understand the rules, knows production. And I think the set medic is great for that. I think that makes a lot of sense. And there are a couple folks in town who have been working on a pretty regular basis. And the feedback that I'm getting from other jobs using these folks, it's worked out great. And there's there's the comfort factor when you have someone who actually understands some of the medical stuff. Like I did a job about a month and a half ago where we hired somebody from we hired a first responder, not a production. He'd never worked on a production before, but he actually knew. I mean, when people asked him about things, because we had to do daily antibody tests. And so that was really interesting. What we did, he handled everything, but he could actually speak to the medical portion and why we were doing things the way they were doing it. And I thought that was really great. And that made me feel better. And I think there's a bit of authority with that, that when you just have somebody who's like, sure, I'm available, I can do that, well, what's your background? I mean, this is such a new territory, and I get like, yeah, you should have this person on set, but who is that person? Well, I think that person should probably be a medic who can read your rules and implement it, and there will be some respect there because that person has a medical background. So first and foremost, I think that's the best choice right now, but that's just me right now in this moment. I think that works best for most jobs, and it's affordable if you have that one person.
So a couple of things. I did speak to our local IATSE rep, Melissa, yesterday, Purcell, and she said that IATSE is suggesting an OSHA 30, OSHA 30 training for that position, just as an FYI for the community. But then also we get lots of questions about what should this person be paid, right? So I know budgets are different, right? And this isn't a normal, it isn't a normal union position or non-union position that we hire medics, but it's a new skill set. So my question is, the rule of thumb that I'm hearing, and I love your feedback on this, is, hire that person and pay them as you might a department head. Mm-hmm. True? Is that fair? Is that good to go by?
I'd say this, because I've had a conversation with another producer about this, and production helps these people quite a bit. So they're not necessarily, until they get to set, they're not on their own. They're running their own department. They are working in tandem with production, as every other department does. They can't do it without production. So I'd say it's probably fair to give them somewhere around there, but I'd say it tops at that, because it's going to require the producer, the production manager, or the coordinator, or whatever, and the AD all together to make your job work. So I don't know if I wouldn't consider that a department head, but they definitely are sort of, once we're on set, sort of set off on their own, like, please come to us if there's an issue, or the AD, but go do your thing now that we have given you all the information that you need. I don't know if that makes sense, but I kind of feel like it should be somewhere in between, like a keys rate and maybe a coordinator. I don't know. I'm still working through that, but I feel like anything higher than that is too much, because it requires the work of a big team of people to make that person's job happen.
Buzzy, anything you don't want to add there?
Yeah, I would agree. I think, I'm starting at a coordinator's rate. I think that, and that's pretty much what I've been paying so far. And especially if I have a medic and a COVID specialist. So I look at that as almost their assistant. So to pay that person a department head's rate is too much, I think.
Okay. That is great. That's great insight and advice. So thank you for that. I want to shift to maybe a slightly uncomfortable conversation, which is, I love this community. I hate seeing everyone hugging each other on Facebook. That, like, there are lots of people not following the rules, and I love you, but please stay 6 feet apart, right? But like, you guys are saying this on set, I'm sure, right? It's hard. You're doing your job. It's not just because you want to hug your friends and be close to your friends, but like, you're doing your job, and you're trying to work efficiently and effectively. But have you run into situations where, how do you manage that? Or are you managing that? Or are you giving that to the COVID site supervisor? Like, what do you do when you see things that shouldn't be happening?
Well, speaking for myself and the one job I've had, so I'll let you know after this job how it goes. But in Atlanta, they were so careful. I never saw anybody even close to hugging. And they were really close, like our Seattle crew is. They love each other. There was one team that just works together all the time, and I never saw anybody break that rule. And in fact, it was kind of interesting to see on the Tech Scout, everybody, they were like little magnets. People moved, and in their head, they were already following the 6-foot rule. They didn't need people to tell them. I reminded them, I said, look, what you are all doing right now is so perfect. And if you keep doing that on the shoot, I couldn't be happier. So I'm kind of hoping to see that. And personally, if I see anybody hug, I'm going to smack them. That's not cool.
Nikki, have you had any situations on set which have been like, wait a second?
I'd say the common violations are not people not wearing their mask correctly. No, I've not seen anybody like, there's, if anything, there's like an elbow touch, or there's like, oh, I wish I could, most of the conversations I have start with, I wish I could hug you. We'll just virtually, and there's that. I've not seen anybody, unless they are on a team of people where they've been working together a lot. But even then, I don't see, they're all, all the jobs, everybody is steering very clear. So it's really just, it's the mask, it's the mask thing. And the frequent thing is that it's just hanging down below their nose. That is the most
you
common.
just kind of nudge them and say, put your mask back. Is that the kind of protocol?
I make a very loud announcement that says it has to be to the bridge of your nose. And it does. It just does. And people will say but it needs to be to the bridge of your nose. And then if you have a COVID person, that person is also there saying that. But usually I'm just like, hey, everybody, look at that. This is how you wear your mask, but that's one thing that your COVID person should be watching out for, obviously. And again, like, I've been on jobs where I've been that person, like early on. It was me and a PA, and I was kind of hired just to sort of watch the crew, and I had to go around, and it was weird because I was just hired for that. So that was sort of the early stages, and and that was, people were still getting used to working. So I had to do a lot of reminding about distancing and wearing a mask. But yeah, that's the most common sort of violation. But the touching, hugging, no, I don't think I've seen that yet.
Well, then I will take it up individually with those people. No, I'm kidding.
Can I just bring up, Amy, can I just add one quick thing, which I find very, very, very hopeful. This happened about 2 weeks ago in South Korea. in a Starbucks. I don't know if you've heard about this, but it was a super spreading event. There were 4 employees, and baristas worked there all day long. They all wore their masks the entire day. It was a 2-story Starbucks. There was somebody who was asymptomatic upstairs who sat by the air conditioning that was drafting down, and something like, I don't know, 28, 30 something people got COVID from being in the Starbucks. So because they had their masks off, they were drinking, talking, eating, and none of the employees got it. So masking is huge. And that's why Nikki and I are going to be really strict about it, because it's like that, between that, the hand washing and the 6-foot distance, those are the key.
Those are the key.
Yeah, I mean, and I'd say, and I've heard this personally. Many doctors, like just many epidemiologists, like it's the time, it's the distance. Like say if we take testing and all that, it's like the distance and the time that you spend with someone. And if you limit that, like if you have tested, that's fantastic, that's great, that gives you some foundation. But it's limiting the amount of time that you're standing less than 6 feet from somebody unprotected. So the more time you spend, even with the mask on, the more time you spend, the more at risk you are, period, just period. So, if you look at that and you look at it from a scheduling standpoint, like an AD scheduling or whatever, like you do everything you can up until that point to minimize exposure. And then you limit the amount of time that person is exposed. And so, talent, et cetera, but there's going to be that little bit of time, but it's the time and the distance are really key. So, that applies to every part of our lives. So, I mean, obviously that Starbucks situation is a little scary, but you're in an enclosed space together, which changes everything. And so you just have, that's why you have to take the extra steps when you're inside, like say on a stage or whatever. You have to take as many precautions as possible leading up to that point, because once you're inside, then you are sort of relying on the health of everyone and the air circulation. So it really makes, when you're shooting inside, even more important that you take extra steps to make sure people are safe. I got off on a tangent. I'm sorry. I wasn't quite sure what I was like. I felt like I needed to say those things.
Mm-hmm. Have you had experience on a set where anyone has fallen ill or shown signs of illness?
I haven't.
No,
not yet.
Luckily, no.
All right.
Oh, which
that
is great.
The best.
Yeah.
That is the best answer ever.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, that will, there's that dialogue after a job, which, I don't know how many companies are doing this or producers or whatever, but it's like, you send out an email and, just say, please let us know, if within the next, 48, 72 hours, you get some symptoms or whatever, just please, let us know. So there's even that time after the job where, you really kind of finish it. You reach out to everybody, you make sure everybody's feeling okay. If they're not, please let you know so that you can do contact tracing, et cetera. So that I think that's important too. But so far, everybody's been healthy that I know of.
So we did actually have a comment or a question in the chat around liability. In terms of the question specifically was, can you speak to the legal liability if someone does contract COVID? Have you had, just doing in the jobs that you have you had any conversations with agencies, producers, or otherwise? I know that you're not lawyers. And we actually did speak to some lawyers, but I'd love to know if you've had any experience with those conversations.
I have not. And I know it's really on everyone's mind lately because there was a first AD that got COVID. No one knows for sure if it was on the job. How do you prove it? But he got COVID shortly after a very long, I think 6-day shoot day job, and was very sick, and then hospitalized and ventilated, and then he passed away. That was our first commercial experience, and I know it's all a buzz in LA, like who's liable, and there's no information coming out. So I think it's deep in the works, like who's liable for that. I don't really know. I wish I did, but I don't.
So part of the resources that we have been putting together at Washington Filmworks, we invited a couple of lawyers to speak to some of these questions that have come up in the industry to our task force. That video is actually up on our website, washingtonfilmworks.org, and you can check it out. At the very highest level, well, I'll let you watch it. How about that? I'll just encourage people to watch it and interpret it on their own. But they did speak to the liability of employers specifically, and whether or not if you as a crew member or cast member are asked to sign a liability waiver, what happens, what they recommend in that situation as well. So I encourage you to check it out. It's on our resources page.
Can I just say one other thing? I thought that was an amazing webinar. And one of the things, the biggest thing I took away was when the lawyers said, you know, this is all a new world. It's called risk management, which we are doing. It's best practices, but it's also risk reward. So we all have to make our own decisions. Do I take this job? Because there's always going to be a risk. And I thought that was a really valuable way to think about it and say it. So I think we all have to take responsibility. Yeah, risk, you know, reward. I need a job, but there's going to be a little risk.
Yeah,
So,
and Buzzy and I talked about this the other day, that the inherent risk of not only just being on the planet, but when you choose to work in the industry we're working in, which doesn't mean you choose to work in it, so you're a higher risk, but everyone has to understand that there's only so much, there's blatant just disregard for your health, but then there's taking every possible step that we can within the job parameters, and having open dialogue up until, you know, the very last shoot day and at wrap about how are you feeling, checking in. Please self-advocate, and please self-advocate, because there's 20% of what we can't see or know about, very minimum, that the bare minimum. So there's just no way that we can cover all the bases. There's just always going to be an inherent risk for everyone. That's why everybody has to just be very open and honest and come to us and say, you know, I'm just uncomfortable with this or whatever, so that we can really cut down the possible exposure or risks, you know, but it's a team effort. And if we go into it with a liability standpoint thinking, or the production company does, that's not the way to do it. Now is the time for everybody to come together as a team and go, I see that you're trying to protect us. I'm going to help you try to protect me, and I'm going to try to protect you by communicating with you. That moment I see something is happening that I don't feel comfortable with.
Mm-hmm.
mm-hmm. But also, I'm going to mention with my crew, like, okay, you guys, we've got 4 days in a row. I'm going to ask you not to go to an indoor restaurant. I can't require you not go, but I'm going to ask, you know, maybe an outdoor restaurant, but don't go to a bar every night, and an indoor bar. I mean, that's just not safe. Yeah. And so all of a sudden you're exposing our team, and I can't enforce it, but I can ask. And I feel like that's a good thing to do.
I mean, I love this, like what you're both talking about is, you know, this team idea, right? It is everyone's responsibility to keep everyone else safe, right? Yep. So that's what I think you guys are really getting at. And, you know, for anyone going into production to, you know, promote that, that within that community and that job is vitally important to keeping people healthy and alive, right?
Yep.
We are very, very close to the end. And I just, you know, you guys have both had like you've had so many like lovely moments, but you've mentioned a couple of resources. You know, you said, Buzzy, like you're sourcing PPE from Amazon because that's the easiest and the cheapest. And then you talked to Nikki a little bit about testing, you know, resources. What other things are like helpful hints that people should know about, that your resources that you're accessing, or, you know, maybe little gems like that, if you got anything else?
Well, I have a little gem because I'm going to be shooting at Pacific Grip and Lighting, and that's where Nikki shot as well. And unfortunately, there's no air exchange in that stage, and no way to get air exchange unless you pipe in air conditioning. But technically, that's not air exchange. That's just putting in air conditioning, and it's super expensive, and probably no production is ever going to be able to afford it. So Damien's my AD, and he and I have been on this task force together, and we just put our heads together and said, well, at the very least, let's get HEPA filters. And there's some really good, strong HEPA filters out there. And if we keep them, whether you're shooting in a house or on stage, I think that should be part of everybody. Production should be on it. Every single job should have 1 or 2 HEPA filters, and they should be positioned in every room. You can move them around, but it's a really great way to scrub the air. And it was designed for construction and, dust and paint, but it's helpful for production and COVID. So that's another little gem.
Have you sourced them, Buzzy, yet anywhere? Is like an Amazon thing or?
Yeah, no, it's, well, you can buy them. They're very expensive. You can buy them on Amazon. I was going to rent them from Herc, but our friend Darcy in the art department, it was coincidence. She just texted me the other day and she said, I'm renting them now. I have several. So I'd love to rent them from her just because.
There you go. Keep it local.
Keep it local. Yeah,
local at all, but.
Yeah. And I love that she took the initiative to think about it and to invest in it. And yeah, just putting it out there. Darcy, is it Zoller or Zeller? I'm not even sure. But anyway, everybody knows her. Is it Zoller?
Everyone knows Darcy.
There's one Darcy.
And I just want to add to that, and this is totally my kind of thing anyway, but not only with keeping my sets green, which I've still been able to do, which has been really great. My tactic has been to minimize when it comes to PPE, to minimize toxicity and disposable plastic and things like that. And so, like on this last job, we sourced our hand sanitizer from a place in Soto that's a distillery, and it's not toxic. It's literally, they're a vodka distillery, and like supporting local, getting things that are not toxic, because and there was just an article that came out about how many of the new sanitizers on the market are toxic. So things like that, keeping that, cleaners, even just, being aware of people, because I have asthma. And so for me, it's really important to use things that are effective, but aren't toxic on set. So I'd say that there's some really great resources. There's a great resource for compostable safety gloves, things like that. Now that is it kind of outside of probably what everybody's worried about. But for me, I'm trying to get that stuff as local as possible, sort of, keeping it safe on many levels, not just safe, barrier, but safe as far as toxicity goes. So for me, that's really important and what I've been kind of focused on, and that's worked out pretty well. And then you can get it, you tap into your local people, and it's amazing what you can get locally, and don't have to order, online necessarily, unless it's, large amounts. So that would be my recommendation, is to try to get stuff that's not toxic. But yeah,
no,
that's just me.
I appreciate that. Well, we are at the end of our hour. Thank you so much for all of the great and, insight and information, and being so candid. I think that's, what we all need right now, is this kind of transparency and honesty. So I just deeply appreciate you being here and being present. I guess we had a little bit of technical difficulty in the beginning. So staff is suggesting that I remind everyone that so many of the resources that you need to go back to work are up on our site, washingtonfilmworks.org. I also want to mention, we are diving into our department conversations as well, meaning we interviewed Doug Hostetter at DP, along with Damien Payne, whom you just mentioned, Buzzy, and talked about their work on set and what it's been like for them going back as ADs and DPs. And that video is up on our site. We also recently did hair and makeup, and that one will be up on our site shortly. So we're going to continue to do these conversations. And as we move forward, let us know what you need, right? Washington Filmworks, everything we're doing right now is trying to do the best that we can to support what you do every day. And we always believe that we work for this community. So if you need something that you don't have, let us know and see if we can help and get it for you, because we're thinking every single day about how we get you back to work every single day. So Buzzy and Nikki, thank you so much. And this will be up on our website too. So you guys, okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everybody.
Take care.
Stay safe.
Stay safe. Bye.
Bye.